Welcome to the Mind Cuts series. Today, we're really diving deep. We're looking at this whole interconnected picture of metabolic health, our environment, and our emotional well-being, especially how it all ties into chronic stuff like autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
And some of the data we looked at, it suggests something like, 93% of people in the U.S. might be metabolically unhealthy? That's staggering.
It really is. And it highlights that this isn't just about, being overweight. Metabolic health is much deeper than that.
Exactly. So our goal today is to kind of unpack what metabolic health and metabolic flexibility actually mean.
And how these environmental factors and even our emotions play such a critical role. It's about getting to the root causes.
Right, moving beyond just the number on the scale. It's about how well our cells are actually working, isn't it?
Precisely. That 93%, it shows a massive opportunity to understand these foundational imbalances.
Okay, so if our bodies are starting to struggle metabolically, what are some of those first signs? Like the check engine lights that might pop up in standard blood work?
Well, some early flags could be things like triglycerides, getting over 100 milli-GDL. And your HDL, the good cholesterol, maybe dipping below 59 milli-GDL.
Right.
It's not just the numbers alone, though. It's often the ratio between triglycerides and HDL. That can be a real clue for insulin resistance.
So it's the relationship between them. Interesting. So those are maybe the whispers. What about more direct markers, stuff that gives a clearer picture?
Yeah, for a more detailed look, you'd want to check A1C. That gives you that 3-month average of blood sugar control.
And the target there is under 5.6%?
Generally, yes. Ideally below 5.6%.
Yeah.
Then there's fasting glucose. You really want that under 90 milli-GDL.
Got it.
Also, high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, or HSCRP, that's a key marker for systemic inflammation.
Okay, and what's a good level for that?
Optimal is really under 1 milli-GL. Shows inflammation is low.
And you mentioned homocysteine, too.
Yes, elevated homocysteine we aim for below 7 and more NL. They can signal metabolic stress and has links to cardiovascular and even neurological health issues.
Okay. One of the sources brought up the NMR test. How does that fit in? It sounds like it goes beyond just the standard cholesterol numbers.
It really does. The NMR, or nuclear magnetic resonance test, is insightful because it doesn't just give you total LDL cholesterol.
Right.
It actually tells you about the size and density of those LDL particles.
And why does that matter?
Because having a lot of small, dense LDL particles is much more concerning. They're the ones that can more easily slip into the artery walls, get oxidized, and fuel inflammation.
Okay, so it shifts the focus. It's not just cholesterol is bad.
Exactly. It helps us see that inflammation and oxidation, often driven by poor metabolic health, are the real culprits. Cholesterol is often just responding to the fire,
That makes sense. And this links perfectly into the next big area, this growing issue of autoimmune conditions. Our sources really connect metabolic health and inflammation to autoimmunity, bringing in environmental and emotional factors. How does that connection work?
Well, think of it like this. Poor metabolic health creates this underlying inflammatory state. The immune system is already kind of on edge.
Okay.
Then you add this constant load of environmental stressors. We're talking mold toxins, maybe heavy metals, pesticides like glyphosate, microplastics.
Quite a list.
Even chronic infections, viruses, parasites. Plus, you layer on emotional stress, unresolved trauma, chronic day-to-day stress. It becomes this multi-hit scenario.
Too much for the system to handle.
Exactly. It can overwhelm the body's ability to regulate itself, potentially triggering or worsening autoimmune responses, especially if someone has a genetic susceptibility.
You mentioned genetic susceptibility. What about things like HLA gene variants? How do they play into this?
So certain HLA, that's human leukocyte antigen gene variants, are really relevant here.
Yeah.
They can actually impair someone's ability to effectively detoxify certain biotoxins.
Meaning they can't get rid of them efficiently.
Right. Their immune system might react much more strongly or for much longer to an exposure that someone else might handle just fine. This exaggerated inflammatory response increases their risk for chronic inflammatory conditions, including autoimmunity. It's like their internal alarm system is just way too sensitive.
That's a great analogy. Now, let's really dig into the gut. The sources mention 75% of inflammation originates there. How does a compromised gut feed into all this, including autoimmunity?
Yeah, the gut is central. This brings us to intestinal permeability, or what people often call leaky gut syndrome.
Right.
Basically, the junctions between the cells lining your gut should be tight. But due to things like poor diet, stress, infections, or those environmental toxins we talked about.
Yeah, they become loose.
Exactly. They become compromised. And then larger molecules, think undigested food proteins, Bits of bacteria like LPS or lipopolysaccharides can leak through into the bloodstream where they don't belong.
And the immune system reacts.
Instantly. It sees these as foreign invaders. But here's the tricky part. Sometimes these invaders look structurally similar to our own body tissues.
Molecular mimicry.
Precisely. The immune system gets confused and can end up attacking the body's own tissues by mistake. Friendly fire, essentially.
And those specific environmental toxins, like glyphosate and microplastics, they directly harm the gut lining too.
They absolutely can. Glyphosate, for instance, has been shown to mess with the gut microbiome, those crucial bacteria, and also damage the intestinal lining itself.
That's trouble.
Yeah. And microplastics can cause physical irritation and potentially leach chemicals, adding to the inflammation and barrier dysfunction.
So if someone's listening and dealing with symptoms like chronic fatigue or joint pain, things that aren't easily explained, what kind of testing could they explore beyond the usual stuff to look for these toxic burdens?
This is really where functional medicine testing shines. Standard labs give you a good baseline, but specialized tests can look deeper.
How so?
Well, you can test blood, urine, sometimes saliva, specifically for things like mold mycotoxins, or assess the overall load of various environmental chemicals. It helps connect the dots between potential exposures and symptoms.
And what about the genetics piece here? You mentioned MTHFR and HLA genes. How does knowing about those variations help?
Understanding your specific genetic variations, like in MPHFR, which affects methylation and detoxification, or those HLA genes tied to biotoxin sensitivity, it provides really important context.
So it explains why I react badly to mold in the house, but maybe my partner doesn't.
Exactly that. It's not about saying your genes are your destiny, but about understanding your individual biological landscape. It helps tailor strategies that are right for you.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the emotional side. The gut-brain axis. Our sources really emphasize this connection. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Absolutely. The gut-brain axis is this incredible two-way communication highway. You've got the nervous system in your gut, the enteric nervous system constantly talking to your brain, and vice versa.
And the vagus nerve is key here.
The vagus nerve is a major player, yes, sending signals constantly. What's really fascinating is how much the gut influences our mood. A huge chunk of our serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter, is actually made in the gut.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that much.
Yeah. So the health of your gut environment directly impacts your emotional state, and importantly, the stress in your head directly impacts your gut function. It's truly bidirectional.
And that explains why stress and trauma can wreak such havoc.
Precisely. Look at adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. The research there is quite clear. Higher ACE scores strongly correlate not just with mental health struggles, but also with a higher risk of autoimmune diseases and metabolic problems later in life.
How does that work physiologically?
Chronic stress, unresolved trauma. They can keep the nervous system stuck in that fight-or-flight mode, sympathetic overdrive. And that state negatively impacts gut motility, it disrupts the microbiome balance, and it can increase that intestinal permeability we talked about.
It all connects back. So what can people actually do? What are some practical, everyday things to help nurture that gut-brain connection and maybe buffer some of that stress?
The encouraging thing is that small, consistent practices can really add up. Just building in moments of stillness, even a few minutes a day, helps calm the nervous system.
Like just sitting quietly.
Yeah, or simple breathwork exercises. Taking slow, deep breaths can have an immediate calming effect. Things like meditation or mindfulness help build awareness of our internal state.
Okay.
And don't underestimate practices like gratitude, consciously focusing on positive things, or self-compassion. Treating yourself with kindness, especially when stressed, can really buffer the negative physical effects. These aren't just woo-woo ideas. They have real physiological benefits.
That's empowering. Now let's circle back to some specific toxins. Mold. It seems way more common than people think, right? Even if you don't live somewhere damp.
Oh, absolutely. Indoor mold growth can happen anywhere due to leaks, condensation, things like that, even in dry climates.
So if someone suspects mold, how is that typically investigated?
Testing usually involves a couple of angles. Blood tests can look for the body's immune response to mold exposure. Urine tests, often specialized ones, can measure actual mycotoxins, the toxic byproducts of mold that the body is trying to excrete.
Is it straightforward?
Well, context is crucial. Not all molds produce harmful mycotoxins. And individual sensitivity varies wildly based on genetics, overall health, immune status. So you need to consider the type of mold, how much exposure, for how long, and the person's individual reaction.
Okay. And what about heavy metals? The sources mentioned that too. How do we figure out if that's an issue?
Metal toxicity testing can be tricky. Standard blood or urine tests mostly show recent or ongoing exposure. They don't always reflect what might be stored deeper in tissues, like bone or fat.
So they might miss a chronic, low-level burden.
They might. Sometimes clinicians use provoke testing. That involves giving a chelating agent, something that binds to metals, to try and pull stored metals out into the urine so they can be measured. But even these need careful interpretation, alongside symptoms and history.
Right. So for both mold and metals, what are some general strategies to help the body deal with them, to support detoxification?
A lot of the strategies overlap, actually.
Yeah.
Optimizing gut health is foundational because that's a major elimination route.
Makes sense.
Using binders can be helpful. Things like activated charcoal, zeolite clay, diatomaceous earth, or modified citrus pectin can help bind toxins in the gut so they're excreted instead of reabsorbed.
Okay.
Promoting sweating is another key pathway. Think sauna use, exercise. And supporting the body's master antioxidant, glutathione, is often important. That might involve supplements with glutathione itself or its precursors like N-acetylcysteine, NAC.
Got it. Lots of avenues there. Finally, let's talk about everyday habits. One source called them the inflammatory core four. What are these common culprits that fuel inflammation day in, day out?
Yeah, that's a useful concept. The core four usually refers to, first, gluten-containing grains. This isn't just about gluten sensitivity, but also modern wheat hybridization, processing, and potential contamination with glyphosate.
Okay, what's number two?
Conventional dairy. Issues here can include homogenization, pasteurization affecting enzymes, and for many people, the A1 casein protein found in most conventional milk can be quite inflammatory compared to A2 casein.
Right. And number three?
Seed oils. Highly processed oils like soybean, corn, canola, sunflower. They're often very high in omega-6 fatty acids, which can be pro-inflammatory when out of balance with omega-3s, plus the processing itself can create damaged fats.
Okay. And the last one is probably obvious.
Sugar.
Yeah.
In all its forms, really. High fructose corn syrup, agave nectar, which is often marketed as healthy but is very high in fructose. Excess sugar drives insulin resistance and inflammation significantly.
Oh, and we should definitely mention alcohol as another major player in inflammation.
Absolutely. So avoiding or minimizing these four
Sure.
or five with alcohol can make a big difference.
A huge difference in lowering the body's overall inflammatory burden. It really comes down to making conscious choices. Nourishing ourselves with foods that support our health rather than undermine it. It's kind of an act of self-respect, isn't it? That's a powerful way to put it. This whole conversation really drives home that optimal health isn't just about one thing. It's not just diet or just exercise or just stress management.
No, it's truly holistic. It demands we look at how our metabolism, our environment, our emotions, and our individual genetics all interact.
So for everyone listening, we really encourage you to think about which parts of this deep dive resonated the most. What connections maybe clicked for you?
Yeah, and perhaps consider what's one small initial step you might feel inspired to take based on this information. Maybe it's looking closer at your diet, managing stress differently, or investigating a potential environmental trigger.
What was the key takeaway for you about this interconnectedness of metabolic, environmental, and emotional health? And based on that, what's one thing you might explore further for your own well-being?